So I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to books. After I read a book by an author I really like, say an author like Richard Ford or Kurt Vonnegut, I'll try to find anything I can find about that book or about that author. Podcasts, YouTube, other book reviews. The internet is a really good resource to find good info. So after reading Be Mine by Richard Ford, I watched a couple videos on YouTube of the author at different book events. Someone in the audience, or maybe the interviewer, had asked Richard Ford what he was reading lately.
And I just read a novel this week by an old friend of mine whose name is Howard A. Norman, who happens to live in Vermont. It's called Come to the Window, and it's set in 1918 in Halifax, Nova Scotia during the pandemic that was going on then, the Spanish flu pandemic going on then. It's a short little novel of about 190 pages, and of course that's short to me. But it's a wonderful, wonderful book. I read it in about 2 sittings, and
Richard Ford recommended this book, Come to the Window by Howard Norman. The book is set in 1918. World War I is raging in Europe, and the Spanish flu is spreading. But this story takes place in a small fishing village in Nova Scotia. It's a harrowing and provocative short drama. It's about a woman named Elizabeth Frame who shoots her husband 3 times on the night of their wedding. She hides the gun in a blowhole of a beached well rotting on the beach. So that's really the inciting incident that sets this story in motion. This murder on a wedding night and this beached well. However, the point of view is told from a crime reporter named Toby Havenshaw. He comes to this small fishing village to cover the pre-trial for a newspaper. What I really enjoyed about the first chapter is there's this moment of humor. It's very courtroom drama-esque, and there's this funny moment that happens. However, as compelling as "Darling, come to the window" was, they weren't the first words Elizabeth uttered in the witness chair, in the spacious dining room of Ottawa House Inn that had become a makeshift courtroom. And therefore, they weren't the first words Peter Lear recorded. Peter Lear is the court stenographer. No, the instant she sat down, according to my pocket watch, 9:15 a.m., in the ladder-back chair provided by Josephine Huntley, the proprietor of the Ottawa House, Elizabeth Frame, unprompted, said, "The saddest part was, just a few hours before I killed my husband, in our matrimonial bed there'd been contrapuntal moans. I doubt that Everett Dewis would have found that the saddest part." Obviously, in saying what she'd said, Elizabeth had outright confessed to the murder, and now all that was left to hear was how, and maybe a little of why, it had come about. It was as if everyone in the makeshift courtroom had to abruptly detour their curiosities from one mystery to another. I actually jotted down contrapuntal in my notebook and followed it with a big question mark. In my line of work, I'm hardly a stranger to the English language, but I had no earthly idea what contrapuntal meant. And it's kind of funny because the judge halts the trial and sends someone to go get a dictionary so that they can figure out exactly what this word means. So one of my dislikes in this book is there are a lot of different characters. Sometimes it's hard to keep track of all the character names. But what he just wrote is that Elizabeth Frame mentioned that there had been contrapuntal moans in their bedroom. And he goes on to explain that Elizabeth Frame really liked to use big words that made her sound smart. But then a few moments later, there's another scene where the judge asks Peter Lear, the court stenographer, to relay some of what he'd written. Apparently, Magistrate Spencer had wanted to demonstrate his sense of irony. "You may resume recording," Spencer said. On his desk, Spencer placed his coffee mug so that it propped open the dictionary and read aloud the definition of contrapuntal: harmonically interdependent in rhythm and melodic contour. "Mr. Lear, please scroll back the tape and read the testimony from the beginning," Magistrate Spencer said. I must confess that at this point, Peter Lear drew my utmost sympathy. And in fact, I cringed on his behalf when shortly after he'd followed Magistrate Spencer's instruction. Lear cleared his throat and read, "The saddest part was, just before I killed my new husband, in our matrimonial bed, there had been contrapuntal moons." Whether Lear had mistakenly written contrapuntal moons and therefore had read it correctly, or whether he'd simply mispronounced moans, I did not know. Either way, no amount of gavel pounding could fend off the ensuing laughter. It just went on and on. Even Elizabeth Frame shook her head back and forth, incredulous. Peter Lear had, in equal measure, a look of despair and embarrassment. He tried to carry on with reading the transcript, but Spencer said, "Mr. Lear, it's fine. Please cease and desist. It's all right. It's fine." The gavel took effect this time. When I was reading this book, I thought the trial would be the main thing of the book, but it actually wasn't. In the pre-trial, we learned that Elizabeth was actually already married to a guy named Oscar Ashe. He was a music instructor, which is where she learned that word contrapuntal. Another curveball is she's also pregnant. During this pre-trial, a man is tasked with blowing up the whale. But while doing this, he accidentally blows himself up and also kills a young boy from town. The eruption sends Peter Lear under his desk, no doubt because of shell shock from the war. You see, many of these people had just gotten back from serving in World War I, so many of them were shell shocked and had PTSD. Elizabeth consoles Peter Lear while everyone else is distracted from the blast. And that night, both Peter Lear and Elizabeth Frame go missing. So really the trial is put on hold, and this book isn't really about the trial. It's about these small towns and how these people deal with grief and bewilderment. They're in the middle of the Spanish flu, middle of this war, and also the middle of this crazy times where wives are killing their husbands on their wedding night. I love the relationship between Toby Havenshaw and his wife. His wife had just returned from France where she was working as a doctor. She witnessed many atrocities during this war. Now she performs surgeries in a nearby hospital. They try to spend as much time together as their busy schedules will allow. The characters, they're all shell-shocked, sleep-deprived, and dealing with the Spanish flu and the war. There isn't a lot of hope left in this world. It's a tumultuous and scary time for everyone. But in the end, just a little hope is left. The strength of this book are the characters Toby Havenshaw and his wife Amelia, and it paints a good portrait of how strong their marriage is. So was this book the right thing for me? Yes, it was. It wasn't exactly what I was expecting. I was expecting more of a courtroom drama or a thrilling murder mystery. But what I got was an intimate look at a marriage and an intimate look at people trying to recover hope in a tumultuous world. In the end, it's a really good practice in reading a book that one of my favorite authors really enjoyed. And it's a different style than how Richard Ford writes, which I really appreciated. So if you've read Come to the Window by Howard Norman, or if you've read any other Howard Norman books, let me know what you thought about them in the comments. Thanks for watching this video. Please hit the like and subscribe button. And as always, read the right thing.